Sir, Mr. Speaker, thank you for giving me the floor. I have 6 objections to the first bill on occupational safety and health, 5 objections to the bill on the Industrial Relations Code, and 4 on Code on Social Security. So I hope you will give me the time to briefly summarize them. On the occupational safety and health bill, sir, the
नहीं,
code
मेरा
fails.
माननीय सदस्य इतना ही है, जब डिटेल चर्चा होगी इस विधेयक पर
ये
तब
सब
अपनी बात
constitutional
करेंगे।
points है, sir. Sir, the code fails to specify explicit provisions to safeguard the overall interests of the unorganized sector workers, with a special emphasis on safety and health as prescribed by the ILO Convention, resulting in a dereliction of the government's duty under Article 253 and 51C of the Constitution, sir. Second, the code fails to incorporate an exclusive chapter on interstate migrant workers, as has been pointed out by my colleague Manish, as prescribed by the Standing Committee, and proceeds with the splitting up of existing provisions contrary to the Standing Committee's recommendations. This violates the directive principles of state policy, sir, under Article 38 of the Constitution. Third, the code permits the central government to reinvent rules in an arbitrary manner by failing to define some key terms and operates instead on narrowly drafted definitions contrary to the Standing Committee's observations, which limits the scope of welfare measures prescribed under the code. Fourth, the code introduces arbitrariness by providing sole discretion to the central government to decide the quantum of wages that the migrant workers shall draw, by failing to honour the recommendation of the Standing Committee to incorporate the term appropriate government, which would have also given the state governments a say in the matter. Fifth, the code is discriminatory since it fails to include effective provisions for women's welfare, which in turn curtails their rights and has a debilitating effect on their participation. This violates the Equality Clause of the Constitution. And finally, on the first item, sir, the Minister has not complied with Direction 19B of the Speaker's directions, which requires him to circulate copies of the bill at least 2 days before the bill is prepared to be introduced. This is the same with all 3 bills, sir. On the Industrial Relations Code, quick objections. Number 1, violates the constitutional principle of separation of powers by allowing the central and state governments to adopt a judicial function, such as rejecting or modifying an award given by the Industrial Tribunal. 2, the code further violates this principle by allowing the state or central government to amend the threshold for applicability of provisions relating to layoff and retrenchment. Third, it severely restricts the right of workers to strike by stipulating stringent conditions that render a strike virtually impossible. And though the Minister mentioned that 74% of the Standing Committee recommendations have been accepted, he has actually blatantly disregarded those recommendations of the Standing Committee, which, if incorporated, would have had an enabling effect on the rights of workers relating to fixed employment, job security, definition of industry, definition of wages, unified definition of workers or employees, all ignored by the government. And finally, on the Code on Social Security, sir, 4 brief objections. The Code allows the government to prescribe such other experience and qualifications for persons to be appointed competent authorities, but the use of such discretion to prescribe experience and qualifications violates the fundamental right to equality under Article 14. They have to conform to the one specifically listed in the Code, sir. 2, the Code does not contain sufficient provisions to ensure that the social security benefits are extended to unorganized workers. Just 2 more objections, sir. Therefore, violation of Article 14. 3, the Code fails to provide maternity benefits for women workers, sir, in the unorganized sectors. That again is a denial of the Equality Clause of the Constitution. 4, most social security schemes stipulated under the Code require the intervention of the appropriate government for their formulation and notification. This violates the principle of separation of powers by assigning a legislative function to the executive. Sir, I just want to say it is not fair to expect the members to go through a voluminous bill with 151 pages and prepare objections in a matter of a few hours. Given the crucial importance of this bill, as my colleagues Mr. Premachandra and Mr. Tiwari have pointed out, I would urge the Minister to consider the Standing Committee's recommendations more fully, the 26% that he has ignored, incorporate them, take these objections into account, and bring the bill back to the House, sir, because the alternative would be to face constitutional challenges in court. And after all the work that he has done to produce these bills, does he want to face judicial scrutiny again? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.